I know I'm going to have to transition at some point in my 70s and 80s. I'm not going to be able to do those things. And so when we look at just that one more year, if we're already there financially, it may be costing us more than what actually meets the eye.
How's it going?
Doing well, Scott. Excited to kick things off today. How you doing?
I'm good, man. We were geeking out a little bit about clients as they approach retirement and before the show. And you have clients who are, of course, just kind of straight down the line. We do the work. We look at how they want to live in retirement. We connect all the dots. They're raring to go. And then there's kind of extremes that can come out from that. On one side, you have people who are like financially more than ready to go, and yet they always want to, in a sense, work one more year. And we can talk about the reasons why we see that commonly and what people can perhaps do to help themselves. And then on the other side, we have people who are, let's just say they're on the bubble for retiring, but they're ready to pull the ripcord yesterday. And so we're kind of at one more year over there too, but that might be us saying to them like, hey, you'll really have a more resilient plan if you can work one more year. So this is the episode, One More Year. And it should be a fun one today.
Yeah. And I think we could think of so many clients over the span of our careers that we've worked with where they fall in these two camps. And I think these are some of my favorite conversations to have, because when we think of really both of them, is it really the one more year? Or can we peel back the onion one layer and say, is it the thing beneath the thing that is it really one more year? Or are we maybe retiring away from something or to something? We can unpack that in a little bit, because there's a lot here. We could talk about the financials, but oftentimes there's the psychological and the emotional element that we really need to spend time addressing. And so, yeah, why don't we dive in? Because I think for that first group, the financials sound like they're there. These are probably clients that have been really good savers, great accumulators, great income over the past several years or throughout their career. And we know the numbers make sense. But now as we start to get closer to retirement, whether it's cold feet, it's, well, maybe one more year does help us out a little bit. And so a part of our job is to say, let's pause. Let's run some numbers. We know the numbers are going to work. So what's actually there?
I mean, when I think of it through that lens, the work that we do here at Stone Steps, we spend a lot of time focused on the individuals before we look at the finances. And as to your point, through this frame, the finances are already good for the life that they're living and how they want to be living life. And from my point of view, if I were for all you at home, if you find yourself in this position, to me, this is where coming back and really visioning for yourself what you really want your next chapter to look like is invaluable. We as human beings rarely move on thinking like, oh, I think I should retire, so now I'm going to go do it. We do it because there's an internal driver, something emotional inside of us that propels us into our next step, right? And so I would go back to looking at what does an amazing life look like to this couple? And you know what? One thing we might find is that for when someone's saying one more year in this instance, is that this person really loves the work that they do and they don't want to give it up. So I think the question would be, is the way that they're doing it now, exactly the way they're doing it now, the way it needs to be for them? If they could allow themselves the freedom to build anything they want in their life, would they choose to perhaps become a consultant instead of working full-time for a corporation so that they have more time and energy to do other things in their life as well, right? Like what does it really look like for them? To live an amazing life. That's the frame I would start with.
Because it's I would think an easy question, but also at the same time really difficult to answer. What do you want? Because
Absolutely.
It's really, I think for the most part, I could probably imagine my life 12 months from now, but then things start to get a little fuzzy 24 months from now, 3 years, 5 years. So then,
right,
having never retired and being on this precipice, we don't know the people we're going to be. We could generally think of like who we're going to spend our time with, what we want to do, but having that blank canvas and going from 0 to 60 is going to be so difficult. So to your point, a lot of these clients, they love what they do. And so it's just this invitation, this permission to be able to say like, okay, how do we build this ideal life? Maybe it's not a hard stop on retirement and employment, and instead transitioning into, volunteer work or consulting work or sitting on a board or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think a lot of times we have this idea of like, we're just going to go sit on a beach somewhere and just completely, clock out. But that's rarely the case.
Absolutely. I mean, I just think of it personally, and it's like, even in my own, I mean, I'm a long ways from retirement, right? I'm 45, but even as it stands right now, it's like I already surf most days in the morning before I go to work, right? Like I'm not a golfer or something like that. But even if I was, a golf round is what, 4 hours max?
Yep.
So it's like, what are you going to fill the rest of your day with? And for a lot of people, the work that you do has a lot of meaning in your life. So you may not want to let it go. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Find a way to keep it in your life if that's the case.
Now, I also want to play devil's advocate and approach it from the other angle too, though. Once we have our financials in order and maybe we're still working through what is that ideal life going to look like.
Yep.
I feel like the safety net that could hang us up or hold us up of this just one more year really becomes then like, we may be missing these hidden costs of like what one more year is actually costing us.
Yeah.
Because when we look at, let's say we're in our late 50s, early 60s, and we start looking at what I like to call like our window of retirement, where we have like our peak years. For you and me, it's surfing, it's golfing, those types of things. I know at some point in my life, I'm probably going to have to transition to a longboard. I'm not going to be able to surf the same waves or for the same amount of time I can before. And so if I could do that in my 50s and 60s, I know I'm going to have to transition at some point in my 70s and 80s and not going to be able to do those things. And so when we look at just that one more year, if we're already there financially, it may be costing us more than what actually meets the eye.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think to me, that's where it comes back to that idea of like, what does an amazing life look like to you specifically right now? If you don't have the encumbrances of money or time and you can do anything you want, what are you actually doing? And then compare that to current life. And if in current life you are already doing all of the things that really matter to you, then good on you, right? But to your point, if you're not, then, time is the one resource that's not limited. That is very limited, right? It's not abundant. So utilizing that, to your point, to do the things that matter to you and find a way to get all these things to work in that plan, that would make a tremendous amount of sense.
Right. Because every year in retirement, we have to think about this with time as a declining asset. Each year of retirement isn't going to be treated the same, right? We're going to have a higher premium on years in our 50s and 60s than we will our 70s and 80s. And
absolutely. When you think about people who are more than ready to retire, the other frame that I think happens often is people just can't fathom taking money from something that they've been building up for as long as they have. I think it's fairly common. We hear people talk about it all the time in advisor circles about how do you help people understand this. My personal frame that I'm a huge fan of is to stop looking at the balance sheet as much, or the investment accounts specifically, as how much do I have in them, and rather focus on how much can they provide you over that 30-year or 40-year time horizon. I think if you flip it to let's stop a paycheck at work and turn on a paycheck from our investments, that can be much easier to understand than just looking at the value of the accounts and did they go up or down and should I be worried?
Yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon because the accumulation game, while you're still working, you're contributing. It's a really different game. Once you hit the stop button and you're starting to pull money out of your accounts. One thing I noticed is clients who were, while they were working, never interested in the markets, all of a sudden start listening to the news more, start checking their balances more frequently. It is a really strange, or interesting rather, phenomenon when money starts working in the different direction and coming out, where we start to pay attention when we say, this is all that we have. This is what we've saved and accumulated. How do we make it last? And that idea of trading one paycheck for the other, I think is such an interesting point to be able to figure out how we're going to build our retirement income.
Yeah.
And I think you and I run similar practices. We've talked about, whether it's the really broad or crude advice of like the 4% rule or Guyton's guardrails. We really like this idea of being able to have, guardrails or adjustable bands on each side of saying, depending on how the market does, depending on years where maybe your income's going to spike, because we know our spending's not always going to be the same each and every year. We may have weddings to pay for, big family trips. We may need a new car. Coming back to how much can our paycheck support us and how does that change when markets change and when our spending changes is such a good point, because so many times I see, is this enough? But what about this? But what about this? And so running those numbers and knowing if it's going to work it's a really crucial exercise to go into.
Yeah, absolutely. And the 4% rule and Guyton's guardrails, for those of you that don't know, are just two ways that have been looked at in with research in the past to see what's a reasonable withdrawal rate we can have from investment accounts over time. I know we've done episodes on that in the past that you can certainly check out. But yeah, having that makes a ton of sense. And then I think the next thing there is just simply looking at, is there a margin of safety on the accounts? So just simply meaning that, if you really just need $5,000 a month from your portfolios, but your portfolios can sustain $8,000 a month from portfolios, well, you have a margin of safety of $3,000, right? So it's like that makes it even safer for you to be able to do anything that you want.
Because that's what I'm hearing at the end of it is just, have we thought of everything? And is there a margin of safety?
And of course, with good planning, you can build in all the one-offs and make sure that you can live comfortably. If we flip that to the people who are kind of on the bubble for retirement, that, their numbers could work. They're close. They're not like, they're not really, really strong. Let's talk about them.
Yeah. I think I have two different camps in this. In working with clients, I either see a set of clients that comes in, maybe they've been in a really demanding job for years, whether it's management, whatever it is, and they're coming to us, and really what they're saying is, I can't sustain this pace for any longer. Like how? Because what we're asking is like, how much gas do you have left in the tank?
Yeah.
Right. And we have another set of clients that we can explore. That are asking something similar, but rather than saying like, I think I could maybe keep going, but I have to make some changes, they're just like, hey, I'm done. I'm in my 60s. I've been doing this for 40 plus years. I'm done. I don't want to do this any longer. And so I think for the first set of clients, when we start to look at this, I think this is why it's so important for us and for clients, for you at home listening, to really know your numbers, to figure out what is it going to take to make your retirement to be able to work. Because for this first set of clients that maybe you've just been running at a breakneck pace and it's just not sustainable. Everybody knows it. Part of our job is to say, well, what if we just hit the pause button for a second? What if we just turn down or dial down the treadmill from an 11 or whatever it is to a jogging pace? Because if we're in that really high pressure, stress-filled job, chances are, although it may be a little bit of a blow to our ego or our pride, we could probably take a step down. And if that buys us time, we're on track here. Maybe let's unpack that.
Yeah, I mean, I've run into that with clients as well in the past where I'm actually thinking of a particular client where they definitely were working very hard, diligently for years, and they were in a sense burnt out. And they actually loved the work that they did. They just didn't want to do it at the rate and pace that they were doing it. And what we recognized was that if they could simply, I believe it was cut it by about half, until they hit what they wanted to be their full retirement age, they were more than okay. Nice. They weren't going to save nearly as much anymore because they were going to use most of the income now just to live. But what was happening was the rest of the funds, we weren't going to be drawing from retirement accounts. So those still had time to grow. And it put them in a place where they were going to be in a pretty good spot. And the idea was like, let's get more of our time back in our life to do other things that we care about, and to take care of our health and do things like that, and just not put the pedal to the metal anymore.
Drift happens slowly, but if we don't look up every once in a while, it's like, wow, we're really off course here. So being able to have those focusing or recentering meetings is really important, because if the numbers work, then let's find a way. Let's get creative. It's a blank canvas. Now, for those other clients that are, as we mentioned, just on the edge, right? We like to say retirement plans, they don't fail. They just simply adapt and adjust, right? So for you at home, it's different levers is the way Scott and I think about this. We could retire early. We could work longer. We could save more, spend less, those types of things.
Mm-hmm.
And especially in times like now where we're experiencing some volatility in the market, if we're getting really close and maybe our numbers were just on the edge and now all of a sudden we're tipping into, at one point it was a bear market, we're tipping into market volatility, this could change some things. Because one of the things I like to talk about is, if we are right on the fringe, the best time in a downturn, or what's the phrase I'm looking for here? When we're looking at our retirement, it's a really good time to still have that job. And so circumstances may have changed. What those numbers, if we were right on the fringe that everything needed to align to work out, and now our portfolio is smaller, well, we may have to go back to the drawing board and start to look at, well, what does just one more year actually look like?
Yeah, I mean, essentially what you're getting at is like that we were alluding to a margin of safety before for clients who are more than financially ready and able to retire. If you're on the bubble, the best margin of safety you probably have is working a little longer because you're allowing more income to come in and you're allowing time for the portfolio to right itself if we do hit a new downturn or something along those lines. Right. Any other thoughts on being on the bubble?
I think it just comes back to just knowing your numbers. That's the importance of having that ongoing plan, is to understand your distribution rate, where that falls historically. We always like to say, retirement's a simple math equation. It's what you have coming in, whether it's today or when we hit stop. And when we hit stop, it's what we have coming in, whether it's from Social Security, your pension, rental income, a part-time job, versus your outflows. What are your living expenses?
Yep.
Right. And once we figure out that math equation, we can then figure out, well, what needs to come from our portfolio? How far is that going to take us? And how do we come back and adjust as life changes? Because again, it's all about being adaptable, about being flexible and nimble in retirement so we could have that longevity.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Well, until next time, appreciate you.